Consumers being in control actually has both a great opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity is that you actually can deliver things that are important to them, that they really care about. The challenge is that you cannot always reach them, right? Because they are the ones that are in control. To better understand this space, we've actually created this construct that we call the 3 modes of consumer communication. We have 3 modes. Mode 1 is when the brand is talking to the consumer. Mode 2 is when the consumer and the brand are having a personal conversation. And mode 3 is when the consumer is talking to another consumer and the brand is in the conversation, either as the enabler or as the subject of the conversation. So these 3 modes provide a great opportunity for us to understand consumer communications and behaviors in a way that's systemic, that's integral. In mode 1, you have the brand actually pushing context to the consumer. If you're, for example, driving down the highway and you have the radio on, or you look at a billboard and an ad comes in and you start thinking about that brand or about that product, that's a great example of a brand pushing context to the consumer and really talking about that mode 1 of communication. Mode 2 is when the consumer and the brand have a conversation. It can be either because the brand has sent something that is personalized to the consumer, or it can be when the consumer actually starts a communication, like, for example, when you call customer service. Mode 3 happens a lot, for example, in social networks. It's one of the great examples that we have of how technology has enabled this, which was originally a very small type of market environment, to be something that reaches millions of people. I mean, people have always had conversations around the brands and the things they like, but they were having it at the town square, at the water cooler, and those are relatively small environments. When you bring that conversation to a social network like Facebook, it's something that can reach potentially hundreds of thousands of people. So you have those 3 modes, and the way that we use them is we use them to understand the basic consumer landscape, and we try to create experiences that work on both sides of the house. Mode 1 and Mode 2, where the brand is actually radiating context into the consumer, is something that happens a lot when you do campaigns. And you have to create episodic communications or things that actually spark interest on consumers to start Mode 1 and, to a degree, Mode 2. That's some of the examples of how traditional advertising have been, is when you have those Mode 1 and Mode 2 spark the conversation. On Mode 2 and Mode 3, if you combine those two from that point of view, you get something that is relatively new, which is the consumer starting the conversation. It's consumer-centric communication, and that is where digital tools have really allowed us to have this mechanism of communication with the consumer, because it is the consumer the one that starts the communication. So as opposed to a campaign or an activation, you have to have a platform, something that's always on, that's listening to the consumer, and is able to react to their desires and their needs accordingly.
In fact, one of the things that used to embarrass me when I first came into advertising and marketing was seeing a creative assignment, or an assignment from the client that would say, tell people this, educate them that, inform them of the other, and as long as they obey and fall into line with our pieces of information, we will make a profit. And it seemed at the very least, it was bossy and kind of rude, and the fact that that conversation has now become more rounded, more polite, I think is a good thing. I don't see client RFPs anymore where they say, this is what people need to know if they're to behave the way we want them to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also, I think, the idea that we have a lot more size. Right? You had conversations that were maybe disaggregated around like Super Bowl and people talking about, last night's game at their offices. Today we have a global conversation, right? With many consumers participating and with the brand, like you say, having an opportunity to have points of control, not control of the conversation, but points of information and points of control.
A conversation is a conversation. It might start in one silo and then move to another, from one mode, and then spread into another mode. And agencies like ourselves have to be adept in all 3 modes. And indeed, as a consumer, if one day I'm thinking about cornflakes, it doesn't really matter to me whether I start thinking about cornflakes when I'm pouring out my breakfast and then maybe hear a commercial on the radio on the way to work and then possibly check on their Facebook page. It's all one sort of Kellogg's type experience as far as I'm concerned. It's only for operational reasons that these silos came up. It wasn't really because of any consumer demand.
Successful experiences when it comes to how brands communicate, and successful, things that go beyond just a campaign or a blip in the radar actually talk about the 3 modes. Because the advantage is that in mode 1 and 2, you're building this episodic, repeatable pieces of conversation that spark interest among the consumer, while in mode 2 and 3, you're actually building platforms and environments where actually consumers can get information, where the brand actually can listen to consumers. So you build this environment where you have platforms that are always on, and you have campaigns or activations that actually spark interest in the conversation. It's not a methodology, it's a framework, but it really helps you understand, I think, the way that the consumer space and the consumer mind is right now.